Welcome back, everyone. Time to talk about another device that I literally love. It was, I had the pleasure of using this phone as a main device for a couple of months, I think about half a year. And even up until last year, I was still using this device or the 2019 for that matter. And what I can tell you is that for sure, at the end of the day, the iPhone 10, in my opinion, has achieved somewhat of a legendary status when it comes down to these type of devices. This is a beautiful phone. I have so much respect for it. And like other phones, whenever I look at it, I just feel like, so much better of a person. My quality of life goes up like crazy. And I will tell you, if you have a device that's much older than the iPhone 10, something like an iPhone 6 or a Galaxy S4 or an LG G3, going to a device like an iPhone 10 can substantially just, change the way you view your phone. Because these older devices are, pretty old. And I will say the iPhone 10 is also kind of old. It's turning 4 years old this year, but it doesn't feel like a 4-year-old device. It has so much capability, and I could even go back to an iPhone 10 and probably not feel like I'm missing out on really that much if I'm being honest. Now, if you want to pick up the iPhone 10, links will be down in the description, but I'll also leave something like an iPhone 10 or iPhone 11, maybe some other devices too, I'm not too sure. It depends how you feel at the end of this video. You can get these devices there and I'll support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the front of the iPhone 10, which I think is one of its best assets for sure in this day and age in 2021, you have that 5.8-inch Super Retina OLED panel. Now, when it comes down to a display like this, is it perfect? Absolutely not. But is it good? Yes, I think this panel is still extremely good. And when you compare it to all the other iPhones that have came out since the iPhone 10, it's pretty much the same exact thing. There's no increase in refresh rate. There's no Touch ID in the sensor. Or there's no Touch ID in the, display. Like maybe the displays have gotten a little bit brighter, but other than that, I don't really see that crazy of a difference. And if other people tell you there's a difference, maybe there is to them. But to me personally, I use this phone for a while. I've compared it against all the other iPhones as you guys have seen. I didn't really see too many differences, if I'm being honest. You still have that notch with Face ID, which is outdated. I wish it has Touch ID because everyone's wearing masks and there's no point in just having Face ID, so that in of itself is dumb. But I think for the most part, it's a very compelling phone, and I literally am still in love with this type of device. Now, on the bottom, you have a lightning port, which is really cool. And on the back, you have glass on the back, which is still really awesome. No frosted glass back, like we have on the newer devices. But I still think that this type of glass back is perfectly fine for whatever you're going to do with it. Now, you do have that dual camera setup on the back of the iPhone 10, but right before we get in that, this phone also has IP certification, which is really cool. So I just want to get that out of the way. Now we can go ahead and talk about the cameras. So as stated before, this thing does have that dual camera setup on the back. It has a 12 megapixel wide angle lens, then a 12 megapixel telephoto lens. And I think honestly, for the most part, for a majority of people out there, this type of camera setup is still extremely, extremely okay. I'm not going to sit here and say it's great or it's perfect, but for a 2017 phone, I think this type of device has a lot of capability for sure. Now, this thing also has the ability of shooting 4K at 60, which I also think is an insanely cool thing to do. Now, I think, 8K is going to be like very, very soon, like the top thing, but I still think, 4K 60 is perfect. I don't think you need anything more than 4K at 60. I film all my videos in 1080p, even these YouTube ones, so I don't really think that. But this was a 2017 phone, so it totally makes sense of what was going on with it and everything. So I think the back camera is extremely good for pretty much everything you're going to do with it. Now, the front camera is a 7 megapixel sensor, and I think, in my opinion, having a camera like this, the front camera, is good. And obviously, I like having this type of camera lens for the most part, but I do kind of wish it did have some type of 4K at 60 capability. I think that in and of itself is another minor problem. It's not an end-all be-all, but that definitely is something to keep in mind. But I do think, this type of camera is a really good camera for pretty much everything you're going to do with it. The back camera is beautiful. The front camera is technically okay for everything you're going to do with it. So I think for the most part, that really pretty much covers it up in the whole entire camera setup department. It definitely gets a thumbs up for me in my books. Now, in terms of the software experience, this is a very interesting aspect of this device because it's still getting software support, and it does support one of the coolest things ever, which is that checkering jailbreak. But I will tell you, for pretty much the software longevity of this device, I think it's going to last for quite a bit of time. This thing has that Apple A10 chip inside of it. So in my opinion, it makes me think that this device is probably going to last maybe like 2 more or 3 more years. So I think that is also going to be an insane thing this device is going to have. The longevity of these type of devices from Apple is insane. I'm pretty sure everyone already knows that by now. So having that type of capability, I think in and of itself doesn't make it, increase the longevity or anything, but it's definitely going to, help in terms of the future ability of it for sure, because even when it's outdated, it's still going to feel like a pretty fast phone and a pretty, smooth phone for the most part. So in terms of the software experience, that pretty much covers it up as well. Now, performance wise, this phone has that Apple 11 Bionic chip inside of it, a hexa-core CPU, and 3 gigs of RAM. Now, this is probably my favorite thing about this phone because, in my opinion, I have had an insanely good experience with this type of phone in terms of the performance, and it was one of those reasons why I kind of went back to it when I bought an iPhone 11 Pro, mainly because it was still more than capable. When I have a phone like the iPhone 10, and I even compare it to something like an iPhone 12 Pro that I use as a main device right now, I see differences. I see things like the app opening speeds, but in terms of a day-to-day use, I would not be able to tell a humongous difference. I would be able to tell some differences maybe in some other areas, but I think for a day-to-day task, things that I do on a daily basis, reply back to texts, open, FaceTime calls and Snapchats and all this stuff, I'm not really going to notice that big of a difference. If I used a phone like an iPhone 8 Plus, maybe I would notice a bigger difference because of the home button, but because we are still using the gesture-based design on a phone like an iPhone 10, you're not really going to notice too many differences in my opinion. So day-to-day tasks, you're definitely going to be okay with it, but even when you step up and do some gaming on a phone like this, I think you're going to have a good experience too. Like, this is a pretty compelling gaming phone. Now, I would not say this is like the best gaming phone of 2017 or anything, but for, like I said before, for pretty much everything you're going to do with a phone, this is going to be able to handle it by far. Now, there's a couple of caveats. I think maybe the biggest problem in terms of the performance, and it's not really a huge one, but maybe it's the RAM management. Phones like the iPhone 12 Pro with 6 gigabytes of RAM with twice the amount of RAM as this will definitely get you a better performance overall. So that's a kind of a big thing to keep in mind, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this phone is any slower just because those phones are newer. It just means that those phones are more capable. But if you don't need all that capability, a phone like this is still going to be perfectly fine, as I stated before. So in terms of the performance, thumbs up for me times 10. The performance on this phone, I think, is still perfectly fine for the price that you're paying for and for it being a 2017 phone for sure. So in terms of the performance, that pretty much covers it up. Now, hitting on the battery life, this device has a 2,716 mAh battery inside of it. You have wireless charging, which is great. Now, when I was about done using the iPhone 10, I definitely saw a couple of problems when it came down to the battery life, and that was about the time I think iOS 13 came out and we switched over to the 11 Pro. And I think it's okay. I think a device, this battery of this caliber is okay, but especially when iOS 14 came out, it pretty much affected everyone's battery life for the most part. So that's another pretty big thing to keep in mind. If you're trying to get the best battery life on a device, getting something like an iPhone 11 Pro Max, or maybe even an iPhone 12 Pro or something is going to do you better. I had great battery life on my iPhone 11 Pro when I was using iOS 13 on it. I was getting much longer battery life on that device than the iPhone 10. So that's kind of what I'm comparing it to. But I still think the iPhone 10's battery life, especially if you get a battery case, it's going to be doing much better. But on stock, you could probably get a day with it on my usage. So that's something to keep in mind. So in terms of battery life, that pretty much covers it up. So to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, how does the iPhone 10 hold up in 2021? Now, I'll tell you some pros, I'll tell you some cons, but I'm going to be honest, this phone is still completely worth it no matter which way you look at it, in my opinion. Now, this phone's panel is still completely relevant. It's beautiful. It's still perfectly fine. No 120 hertz on it, but there's no 90 or 120 hertz on any iPhone out there right now. You have that gesture-based design, which is beautiful too, which is another huge asset for it. You have the notch, which is still about the same on all the other iPhones, and Face ID, which is exactly the same on all the other iPhones, for better or for worse. You have a beautiful feeling phone. I mean, this phone arguably feels better in the hand than an iPhone 12 in my opinion, just because of the stainless steel sides and everything. That dual camera setup on the back with the ability of shooting 4K 60 and portrait mode and all that good stuff is still, a very compelling and still a really good phone for this day and age. You have IP certification, wireless charging, really good performance still in my opinion, and just those things in and of itself make this phone a really good value for sure. Now, there are a couple areas where this phone may not do the best in, I would definitely say the battery life isn't perfect. It was definitely one of my main complaints when I was, ending off using the iPhone 10 as a main device. The software updates may not be lasting for as long as people might think. I mean, a couple more years is still perfectly fine, and that's more than enough for a lot of people, but sooner than later it's going to end. I think that's kind of a dumb reason though. I mean, this phone software is going to be lasting for a long time. The front camera can only shoot 1080p at 30 frames, So that's another kind of a minor thing. It's not necessarily the worst front camera ever, but no 1080p at 60 and definitely not any 4K at 60, which is, kind of becoming the norm now. The last couple of iPhones have actually had that. This device doesn't have that, so that's another big thing to keep in mind. But even with those things being said, this phone is still completely worth it. This is such a capable phone. Like I said before, anything you're going to do with it, it's going to be able to handle it. Is it going to be perfect? No, but for the price tag and for how old this phone is, I think it's totally justifiable. Now, there are a couple other phones, like I said, that I would kind of recommend too. The iPhone XR and iPhone 11s. You can pick those things up for maybe like a couple more $100 than this device, but I still think the iPhone X is probably one of the better value per dollar iPhones right now. So that really pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count. So it'd mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.